Have you wondered how it is possible that a car designed by one of the most legendary teams of Formula One becomes practically inconducible in middle curves? What is destroying the balance of the Ferrari SF-25 until it makes it unstable return after return? The history of SF-25 began as many technical tragedies do in Formula One, with excessive optimism and preliminary deceptive results. During the preseason, Ferrari showed signs that excited their most faithful followers and generated hopeful headlines. The tests carried out in Bahrain delivered clean turns, constant race simulations, and figures that, at first glance, put the SF-25 inside the head package. But the truth is that these data did not reflect the reality that would soon manifest in great prize conditions. As soon as the lights went out in the first race of Australia, the idyllic image crumbled. The car that had promised so much began to show signs of discomfort in technical curves and rapid transitions. What seemed to be a neutral balance on the track was an erratic behavior. Charles Leclerc struggled to maintain the ideal drawing, especially in linked curves, and Lewis Hamilton, still adapting to SF-25, began to report strange sensations since the formation return. Already in the second race weekend, China's Grand Prix exposed the root of the problem. There, Hamilton was disqualified by irregular wear of the flat background. It was not a human mistake or a bad strategy decision. It was the tangible symptom of a structural failure. The inability of the car to maintain a stable driving height under full load. This was the final signal that Ferrari was not facing a challenge of tuning, but of design. All this beginning of the season made it clear that the performance of the SF-25 was a mirage. An ambitious project, but based on aerodynamic and mechanical principles that did not translate correctly to the dynamic demands of a race weekend. The difference between the simulator car and the one that stepped on the asphalt became insurmountable. And for engineers, pilots, and fans, it became painfully obvious that the good start was simply a misception error by a misleading preseason. Most of the great failures in Formula One are not born of a bad execution, but of a bad conception. And that is exactly what happened with SF-25. Ferrari did not trip over the implementation of the car, but in its most fundamental design, the heart of its chassis, the rear suspension. What should be an aggressive evolution to close the gap with McLaren and Red Bull, ended up being a false step that dragged the team to a maze of instability and frustration. But Formula One does not forgive conceptual errors, and what seemed like a brilliant innovation quickly became a technical ballast. The new pull rod not only lacked torsional stiffness, but seriously compromised the ability of the car to maintain its stable aerodynamic platform in real race conditions. Every time the car was fuel, its center of gravity changed more than expected. The vertical loads exceeded the planned limits, and that made the bottom of the car touch the ground, destroying the efficiency of the diffuser and generating unpredictable rebounds just at the critical moment. The average curves. This erratic behavior did not appear in simulation or in wind tunnel, where the conditions are standardized. But on a real track, with cross-wind, full tanks and tires in the heating phase, the suspension literally collapsed. In the curves that should represent the fort of the car, those that combine side load and constant support, such as 6 and 8 in Albert Park or the section of the second sector in Shanghai, the SF-25 became a nightmare for the pilot. There was no way to predict whether the rear axle would endure the trajectory or if it would be released, causing survival. Lewis Hamilton, who arrived in the hope of finding a competitive car, described him as a car without a predictable car. Charles Leclerc confessed that he should change his way of braking and accelerating in each circuit because the car did not respond in the same way 2 weekends in a row. The lack of consistency was not psychological or subjective. It was mechanical, and came directly from that badly conceived suspension. As the races progressed, Ferrari tried multiple solutions. Reinforcement plates, changes in the adjustments to the rake, even variations in weight distribution. But no measure attacked the root problem. Pull rod design, being structurally integrated with the gearbox, could not be modified without redesigning much of the car. And that, in full season, is practically impossible. The most alarming thing is that this whole system was validated with data that did not faithfully represent the real career dynamics. The error was systemic. The suspension that had to grant a tactical advantage in the race ended up being the greatest obstacle of the SF-25. There is no change of tires, pilot, or strategy that can compensate for a car that does not respond linearly to the forces that govern it. If the rear suspension problem was already serious, which came later, exposed a second layer of complexity that ended up destabilizing any possibility of recovery for Ferrari: the height of the car. A seemingly simple element to manage became the final puzzle that sank the consistency of SF-25. And it is that in Formula One modern, the height of the car is not just a matter of safety or visibility, it is the central axis of all the aerodynamics of the car. Altering it, even if it is a few millimeters, can transform a balanced car into an indomitable machine. The SF-25, like all cars of the generation of soil effect, depends on a precise airflow that covers the flat background and feed the Venturi tunnels. That negative pressure that sucks the car to the asphalt is the heart of performance. But that extremely sensitive system only works if the car maintains a stable and predictable height. In the case of Ferrari, that stability was never achieved. And not because the team did not know how to calibrate it. The problem is that the technical decisions taken with the suspension and distribution of masses made it impossible to find a functional equilibrium point. During the analysis sessions after the first races, the telemetry data were implacable. With 100 kilos of fuel, the SF-25 tended to sink until the critical sections of the circuit, such as prolonged support curves and elevation changes. That loss of height was not uniform. It varied depending on the type of curve, the temperature of the tires, the rear axle load, and the angle of attack of the front wing. This made the car response inconsistent, unpredictable, and extremely sensitive to external conditions. The most alarming thing was that engineers met a paradox. Any setup change became a sacrifice. If they increased the height of the car to avoid flat bottom contact with the asphalt, they destroyed aerodynamic flow. The load in fast curves disappeared, and with it, the possibility of staying competitive against McLaren or Red Bull. If, on the contrary, they lowered it to recover that load, the flat background crawled on the ground in long or strong braking straight lines, generating sparks, uncontrolled wear, and, in the case of Hamilton in China, direct disqualification. Charles Leclerc, particularly sensitive to the balance of the car in braking, began to lose confidence. I didn't know if the rear axle was going to answer or if I was going to release it in the middle of a sequence. In a car with so much variable downforce, this uncertainty was lethal. Lewis Hamilton, accustomed to finding confidence in the precision of the support points, found a car that literally changed behavior according to the return. The career conditions were not stable and the SF-25 did not forgive any fluctuation. In the garage, Maranello engineers began to implement emergency solutions. They played with the stabilizing bars, modified the inflation pressure, introduced small ballast to repay the mass center. But all were temporary measures. None could address the background problem. The car height was directly committed by a poorly raised structural design. It was not a matter of correcting. It was a matter of redesign. And that, in full season, is a luxury that no team can afford. Ferrari, in his eagerness to innovate and press the development, fell into a classic engineering trap of F1. Push the limits without having a margin of correction. SF-25 is a car with advanced concepts, but applied without slack or tolerance. There is no space to adapt. There is no way back. Each race becomes an act of survival, a constant negotiation between what the car allows and what the circuit demands. At the end of this analysis, what remains is not just a technical conclusion. It is a warning for the entire Formula One. What we are seeing with the Ferrari SF-25 is not an isolated case. It is not an error of setup or a momentary bump in performance. It is the direct consequence of a wrong concept from its root. Ferrari not only failed in the execution of a mechanical piece, he failed in the construction of the car. And that is the most devastating. Because when a team with so many resources, history, and talent is wrong in the foundations, the consequences are dragged throughout the season. There are no aerodynamic improvements that can save a poorly raised suspension. There is no simulator that loyalty reproduces the dynamic pressure of a poorly balanced car in a medium speed curve. And there is no pilot, however more champion, that can tame a car that reacts differently every time the piano or the DRS is activated. Ferrari bet strongly. He changed his concept of suspension, altered his design philosophy, and put a car that promised revolution in the hands of Leclerc and Hamilton. But what he delivered was an irresolvable technical enigma in real time. And that is perhaps the greatest punishment in a sport where every thousandth of the second account. Knowing that you have power, you have talent, you have strategy, but you cannot turn any of that into results because the car simply does not allow its full potential to extract. And the most worrying is not the present. It is the future. Because correcting this type of errors is not a matter of a new spoiler or an update in Barcelona. It is redesigning a philosophy. Rethinking the way the team understands the relationship between aerodynamics, loading, and mechanical behavior. And that, in full season with the pressure of the media, the fans, and of two pilots with title expectations, can become a perfect storm. But at the same time, this situation opens a question: can Ferrari redeem from engineering, or are we facing the beginning of another was wasted? Or are we facing another red frustration chapter? Leave me your opinion. Do you think Ferrari has courage and clarity to rebuild its concept in the midst of the storm? Or will this be another year in which your winter mistakes condemn their summer?